Lenny Breau.
I was doing a show, let me see, it was out of Winnipeg. And it was my own show. It was called the Lenny Breau Show. There was me on it, and I had like, I think there was a couple of girls on it, looked like singing too.
That really gave Lenny a very, very high profile. You turn on the TV expecting to see some little regional show, and you would hear this guitar player that was probably one of the best guitar players in the world.
And somebody heard that show. They were traveling through with the Grand Ole Opry, and this guy that played guitar was a friend of Chet's, and he says, "Well, give me a tape of that show, like just the sound, you know." And he brought it down and played it for Chet, and Chet heard it, and, flipped out.
Yeah, he plays a lot of my licks, but he's modern with them. I'm kind of old-fashioned and square, But he plays the harmonics that I do. I originated that, but he does it a lot better than I do. Hey, Lenny, how about playing something? How about playing something a little more down home that the folks know? How about Georgia, something like that, and play it. Yeah, give us a lot of melody for about a minute, and then improvise a little, huh?
All right.
Yeah, I like that one.
Okay. I'll do it with a triplet feel. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4 with triplets. Okay? 1, 2.
I can spot people with talent, and not bragging, but I can, and I admire people like that so much when I run across somebody that's so creative, and he's a very creative person, and so I dig him. I dig anybody that's creative.
You know, for years, Lenny had been saying, like, I want to do this album, but I don't feel ready. And then he had been away from Winnipeg. He wasn't living in Winnipeg because we hadn't played together for a year. And then out of the blue, he phoned and said, I'm ready. I'm going to do the album. I spoke to Chet. This was in 1968. And so I want you and Reg to do it with me. And I was, very flattered because we hadn't played together for so long, and he'd been all over the country consorting with all manner of probably very good musicians. But anyway, the three of us had something. We had an empathy, and that's what he wanted.
Lenny at first felt not quite ready to record an album, which is, Lenny was already at a point that is just a remote human possibility to most guitarists, but Lenny thought he could do better. He was also a little nervous about being associated with country music, so he was thinking more of doing his first album with Blue Note or, a more jazz-oriented label. But he'd been working with these two guys, Reg Kelm, the drummer, and Ron Hallderson, bass player. And they had been the Lenny Breau Trio playing these little restaurant gigs and hotel gigs around Winnipeg, and they really had an affinity for one another.
Went down to Nashville, and we were booked for 3 days of recording. We did 2, and then Chet Atkins, who was producing it, said, we've got enough. Don't come in tomorrow,
Lenny had nothing worked out in the studio. The way Lenny was used to playing was just starting to play a tune off the top of his head. The guys had known him long enough that they could just jump in and embellish and support him in whatever he did. But it wasn't really what Chet Atkins wanted, so he imposed a little bit of direction on it. Not a lot. Lenny was pretty much free to do whatever he wanted.
The actual recording session was pretty neat. Chet was such a wonderful person. He was the quintessential country gentleman. He was an absolutely beautiful man, and he did everything he could to make us relaxed. And I think Lenny complained about the lighting at one point. It was just like too bright, and he said, "Oh man, it's too bright." So Chet had some maintenance guy come in with a 12-foot step ladder and climb up and put in a red bulb,
I think his biggest audience will be guitar players for a while because that's the way all great artists start. It kind of tends to be a an underground sort of thing. And then like a Roger Miller, he was the hottest guy in Nashville for years before the record buying public caught on to him.
At that time, in 1967, even the greatest jazz musicians were beginning to scuffle a little bit. People were no longer interested, and that music was music that belonged to another era. So Lenny playing a jazz version of Monday Monday or Hard Day's Night was not what people wanted to hear. And even when jazz musicians found a way to become commercially successful, people like Miles Davis with Bitches Brew, by bringing in, by cutting chords down so that a song would only have 2 or 3 chord changes and really becoming heavy on the rhythm and doing things that rock players or fans of rock music could relate to. That was just very, very far away from what Lenny was doing, which was harmonically dense and melodically quite beautiful, and that's not what was going on then. You know, and there was nothing on it that was good for radio play. Lenny was not interested in touring or doing any of the promotional things involved with promoting the album. So the album just really didn't go anywhere.
Well, I went through all these periods in my life. I went through the Chet Atkins phase, and then after that I started listening to Sabicas. He's a flamenco player, and I studied that stuff by myself for 2 or 3 years. And I was buying like books on classical music and learning the techniques and listening to Segovia and these people. And I learned the techniques, and I learned a few of the tunes. But then I decided I didn't want to pursue that because, like, that's a thing that takes all your time. You know, like, if you're going to be a classical player, well, you got to play it all the time. And so I was torn in between, improvising and playing classical. And I couldn't do both, so I had to make a choice. So I went into jazz. So what I do is I apply those techniques to my jazz playing.
His contribution is just, you know, it's just mammoth, you know. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a guitar player who lived who contributed more to the instrument. You know, Lenny had this world vision. I mean, if he lived long enough, he probably would have incorporated every culture into a style of playing. You know, I mean, if you look at the way he plays, it's country, it's jazz, it's Indian music, it's flamenco. You know, I mean, that was kind of, as he would kind of understand one culture and one way of playing and, you know, absorb it into his style. And he would talk about that. You know, he would talk about trying to, you know, bring these things into his and add them, you know, into his own way of playing.
Yeah, my favorite album would be Live at Shelly's Manhole. I think that's the one that I mean, really is regarded by many a guitar player as one of the most important, influential guitar albums to ever happen.
That was something that Chet Atkins arranged. He wanted Lenny to play in a live situation where, you know, most jazz musicians are at their best. So he had a Nashville producer named Danny Davis go out and produce Lenny's album recorded live at Shelly Mann's club. Shelly's Manhole, it was called. Lenny was there for 3 days, and an RCA mobile truck was brought in to capture what went on. A lot of Lenny Breau fans consider that to be Lenny Breau's great masterpiece. They didn't have anything that they could play on the radio because Lenny couldn't keep his songs short enough. He would just go on and on and on, although he tried to do it, and he tried to do a short version of Sweet Georgia Brown, but it turned out to be 16 minutes long or something, and he wasn't being difficult. He just could not control his artistic impulse when he was on stage. So.
And that record came right out in the middle of acid rock days, you know. It was really heavy. I kind of got lost in the shuffle sort of thing. And that was a pretty tough time for jazz back then.
towards the end of the 60s and early 70s, Lenny started really taking massive doses of hallucinogenics, smoking a lot of pot, and then eased into harder drugs. He was living in Toronto at the time, and hard drugs were all over Toronto. And most of the musicians that he was playing with were using hard drugs, and that became a factor in his life around that time.
But we were in this cab anyway, and he pulled up his pant leg, and he had his kit like strapped to his leg, you know, little box with his shoot-up kit, you know. And I just like, my stomach churned, and I made some kind of comment to him like, you know, you should give up that shit. And he said, well, man, like, you drink, don't you?
That coupled with I think the disappointment of not really doing well with his first two albums, and just being out of control, you know, as far as his drug use goes, that really put an end to the record company's interest in representing him, and that was pretty much the end of his relationship with RCA, but not the end of his relationship with Chet Atkins.
He sacrificed everything. He sacrificed everything for his development as a player, and that's what it takes. You know, people talk about him being a genius, and I never really thought of Lenny as a genius. You know, he was certainly like highly intelligent, but to me the overriding thing was his love of his passion and his love, and what he did with that passion and love was just like give his entire being to it. You know, I mean, there's a lot of people that have, you know, that love playing and, you know, want to do something, you know, but I mean, he just gave everything to it. He just gave his all of his life, and that cost him.